Good morning, everyone. I am speaking with Rasoul Salehi, who is the managing director of sister wineries LaStella and Vieux out in BC. And we're talking today about Earth Day and climate change and how that is impacting our winemakers right here in Canada. So thank you for taking time to chat with me. I know that you're in the middle of bottling, so it's busy time for you.
No, absolute pleasure. This is definitely a very, very serious topic. Is basically we are busying ourselves with inner politics and you know the politics of Canada and the rest of the world, Democrats versus conservatives, left versus right. But the White Walkers are coming a la Game of Thrones, and that's
Yeah.
the big elephant in the room. It doesn't matter what we do here. The climate change, the way we are seeing it in our part of the world, it is absolutely something not to take lightly at all.
Well, winter is coming for sure. And normally you guys have quite moderate, temperate winters out there. But the last several seasons, I know especially last year, you experienced really extreme temperatures, both ends of the spectrum. So, can
Very
we
much.
just talk about how the extreme cold temperatures haven't impacted the wines? Because most people think of wines, the vines are growing in the spring, summer. So, what difference does it make what's happening in the winter?
Yeah, I mean, sure, absolutely. They shut down and they go to sleep and they're dormant in the winter season, but not until the temperatures dip below a certain level. Different grape varieties have different winter hardiness levels to them.
Hmm.
Certain, the Pinot family, for example, can be tolerating, and the Riesling family can tolerate, colder temperatures better. But maybe your Syrahs or some of the more warmer climate adapted vines don't. So once temperatures start going below minus 15, minus 18, minus 20, you start seeing some damage.
Yeah.
Sometimes it comes in form of the buds being damaged. And each bud obviously would be a new shoot for next year and will be clusters of grape on it, which, if it gets damaged and dies, it won't be. And sometimes is outright killing the vines. And the other danger that can happen is a lot of the time, because our growing season is so short, a lot of us try and prune earlier. The earlier you prune, usually the bud break happens a little bit earlier for you too. Even if it's by a week or so, it really helps at the end of the day. But then one danger of that is a term that is called dieback. From the opening of where you prune, cold penetrates and starts going down in the cane, and it can explode the cane or just go and start killing the buds through and through. Um,
So do you combat that? Like, do you tie it up or sort of cover that spot? Does that
there's
happen?
no, there's really not much that can be done. Basically, frost fans and heat generating furnaces are only really effective for controlling spring and fall frost, not when the temperatures are minus 20.
Hmm.
They're useless. They won't do anything at that time. And as far as starting, as you may see some places in the old world with some Grand Cru vineyards in Burgundy, every 10 feet they start pit fires of crude oil burning to create the smoke and create some of the heat, but that's not allowed in our region. And as far as feasibility goes, it's just not really something that we can do, because they're talking about tiny acreage of a parcel that may be 2-3 million euros an acre. So when you're sitting on something that precious, you may
Hmm.
take every approach and every cost, because at the end that bottle of wine may be a few $100s or more, but not when you're turning out wines that are 30, 40, $50 price point. It's just not feasible to do that. Some regions, including our very own Prince Edward County in Ontario, obviously they endure extremely hard temperatures in the winters. A practice that they do often is laying down a cane and they bury it and they hill up over it and
Hmm.
protect that vine for another growth the next year should the main trunk get damaged. But this is not something that we've ever had to do with any grape variety here in our region. Now, do we have to start thinking about that? Sure looks like it. We've been having some internal discussions about that. So it's still a little too soon to say what we do about the winter damage. But for sure, what happened earlier this year in January with the anecdotal examples of taking some passes through our vineyards and with a knife cutting through into the buds and seeing if they're alive or dead. It looks to be on average, again, this is just a preliminary number. We have to wait for bud break and see what happens, but it looks to be somewhere between that 30-40% damage.
Wow.
Whereas some of our dear colleagues further up north, where it gets much colder in the Okanagan, they have reported virtually 100% loss. So that year will not be producing any grapes.
Hmm.
We remember this in 2008, 2009, where it was even harsher than this past winter, and be it apricot trees or cherries, from walnuts to peaches, not a single fruit on any of those trees. But then the year after, they come back strong.
Okay, so that was my question, is that if the vines shut down this season, does that mean that they're dead overall, or is there a chance that they could come back next year if temperatures moderate?
Vines, like weed, like people, are fairly resilient. It really takes a lot for them to just give up and die.
Hmm.
So they can come back, but sometimes that damage is tremendous, and it takes a long time for them to come back. And then you end up with a vine that was pretty balanced based on the way that you pruned it before, to a vine that is now completely unbalanced. And so when we talk about tons per acre, for example, it starts losing its meaning because it's now very different plant by plant, because within your plot, the soil, the heavier soils freeze and protect the roots better, rather than lighter base soils, sandy soils, where the cold can penetrate it and cause more damage. So you end up with some rows that have a lot of dead vines, some rows that have weaker vines, some rows that are doing okay. So it just makes it unbalanced
Right.
and makes it very hard to work. So you need to go back to plant by plant work.
It's interesting that you're talking about how they bury the vines out in the county, because I was wondering if that was something you have had to resort to, but now I see that you're in discussions that that might be something you'll have to look into in future.
Yeah, so for now, the only thing that we have done is we were fortunate that we had not started pruning before the frost came,
Mhm.
basically that Arctic system outflow. So we have left quite a bit more buds on the vine, and we prune less stringently. So this is going to hopefully give us some recovery, some backup, but
Mhm.
it does mean that our labor costs are going to be tremendously higher, because the work that you could have done and moved on from in the winter time, now you have to go back again at the time of bud break, and then you have to shoot thin, and then you have to sucker more. So, and labor is not cheap in our country. Is
Right.
very, very expensive. We don't have the situation of illegal immigrants, or just overall a big workforce of immigrants that come and do this work, as we see down south with our colleagues in the States, or you see North African working crowd,
Mhm.
or Eastern European workers in Western Europe. We don't have that. So um, labor is expensive, and it's a very, very sad that this is coming right at the same time of the global crisis of logistics and dry good costs because of COVID. So,
It's just
and being in a
exacerbating
bit of an
all the issues.
being a bit of an inflation situation
Yeah.
too, people's earnings are not going up, but the cost of living and cost of everything else is tremendously going up. We're doing our best to keep our prices the same,
Hmm.
because they're already at a limit of where we think can go above that, but then literally we will lose our shirt. It's just something that we have to have, all of us. Not when I say we, I don't mean we, as in our industry has no choice, and it's very heartbreaking to have to increase prices. Um,
Hmm.
it's and even then we're still absorbing huge amount of that cost increase.
Well, that's one of the reasons I was so interested in doing this piece for Vine Roots, for talking about Earth Day. is because I don't think a lot of people look at the wine industry and consider the impacts that climate change would have on wine. It's just not it's just not considered, I think, in most regards. We think of our food costs as going up, obviously, because climate change is impacting farms. But I feel like most consumers don't consider wineries to be farms or farmers. So I was really interested to see how this is impacting, and also really interested that 60 Minutes recently did a piece on how climate change is affecting the wine world. So when it's reaching the levels of 60 Minutes, then it's really becoming a global issue.
It is
So
a global issue, absolutely. You've again, what is out the door for now? Forget about this, extreme cold winter. But what is definitely out the door for now, for a while for us, is that predictability. You
mhm.
don't know what kind of a year you're gonna have. The vintage variations are huge. Give you an example. In 2019, we had to uh, rush and pick the grapes early October. I want to say it was October 6th or 7th that we got a major frost. And at that time, the leaves basically die, shut down. So the grapes are just sitting there. No more phenolic ripeness is happening. There's no more maturation happening. And in many other years, we are in shortened t-shirts still harvesting late October. So we're talking about some major differences. We're talking about years that harvest has started middle of August,
Mhm.
and some years that it doesn't start until middle of September. So we are not talking about 5 days or a week difference. We're talking weeks, and that unpredictability of what is going to happen. Okay, I'm going to leave a little bit more crop on the vines because typically, or always, or almost always, there's never always, but almost always, I'm safe until mid to late October.
Right.
That's usually when frost comes. And then, no, it starts coming much sooner and it massively affects everything that you're doing. So and then you go ahead the next year and say, okay, I learned my lesson. I'm going to leave a lot less crop on the vine to ripen them earlier and ensure that I don't get into those situations. But
Mhm.
then you end up with an intensely hot year that just does not give up. And in those instances, the lower the crop you have, the more over mature those grapes get. So they go from, so you were striving for ripeness. Now you're trying to all of a sudden in the middle of the battle, the rules have changed on you and you're working to eliminate or stop over ripeness.
Mhm.
The way you're pruning everything is different, in the Okanagan, because the seasons are so short. VSP, or vertical shoot positioning, and stripping the leaves and exposing the bunches to the sun was pretty much the standard practice across the grapes, across the vineyards, across the entire region. You can't do that now. You need those leaves to protect the grapes
Right.
from that intense, almost 50 degrees Celsius heat dome that we had last year. And sure, that was an extreme one, but it's not like 2015, 16, 17 were much cooler than that. No, they're still in the very high 30s. They still sometimes go into the low 40s.
And
It's
previous to
just
that,
getting extreme.
right, previous to those high 30s temperatures, what would the average temperature be in the summer? What are your summers like out there?
I mean, there are actual figures and facts as far as the growing degree hours and average temperatures. I don't have that in front of me, so I'll just say it with some hesitation and a rough anecdotal number. We would be talking usually low 30s.
Okay.
At times,
That's
there may be a heat wave coming and the temperatures go into the mid 30s, and almost all vines in those temperatures do shut down and then not much work is happening, but they would be brief periods of time, not prolonged amount of time. Then
hmm
add forest fires to that, and that layer of smoke filters out the strength of the UV. And even though it's hot out there, but as far as the photosynthesis is concerned, not much action is happening. So it's interesting when you try the finished wines from those vintages, there's an element of overripeness and underripeness happening at the same time. It's almost as if that wine is coming from an intensely hot Mediterranean type climate. At the same time, it has characteristics of a very, 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 very cool climate, because you still have those green, unripe flavors and aromas. The texture of the tannins are more bitter and more, again, unripe. Um, they it just becomes a mess.
Right.
So again, there are things that can be done. There are practices in the vineyard that can be taken into place, but it just means labor cost that was already high is going to go higher and higher and higher and higher. And you need to act very quick. So you need to have an unbelievable team at your beck and call, really experienced crew, and be ready to prance and just jump on the situation when you are seeing that there is a major weather system coming through, to take some decisions. And sometimes you just can't, once the leaves have been gone, you can't put them back on.
Mm-hmm.
Once your yields are low, you can't all of a sudden now go and increase them, and that's why sometimes we are envious of the brewery industry. You mess up a batch, you throw it out, you start the next day, or maybe even that same day. With us, you only get one shot a year, and the rules, kind of like F1 racing, change year after year. So you get used to it, you figure it out, you know what to do for next year. The entire rule book changes on you. It's very humbling. There's beauty to it. It
Mm-hmm.
just puts your ego at rest and says, okay, forget about recipes, forget about all of that. I'm just gonna go with Mother Nature and be humbled by it and do the best I can with it. So there is an element that is actually very human and natural about it, that is somewhat bizarrely enough heartwarming, but at the same time is gut wrenching, and it really is difficult. It's very sad when you've done all the right things,
Right.
all the right work, all those long days, back-breaking work, literal sweat and tears, and it was just not enough.
It sounds like you're doing everything you can to mitigate and to make up for the dramatic changes that you're coming across. And one of the terms we've all become so familiar with over these last 2 years is pivoting. It seems like you really are now being forced to be able to pivot at a moment's notice. What are there things that are giving you hope for future crops? Like you're doing everything you can to deal with circumstances as they arise, but what's the best case scenario?
Oh man, this is I mean, you it's a great question, and is one that we're still trying to find out. It's like being in the eye of the storm. You don't know. We
Mm-hmm.
don't know. There's a little voice in our head that says, okay, maybe not blow it out of proportions. Maybe it's just something that is happening, a weather system that is going to be a few years, and we kind of go back to a certain normal, or a new normal.
Right.
And then you're like, no, it's just like it's up and down and up and down, cold year, hot year, early bud break, late bud break. Okay, from intense heat to the intense cold, getting torrential rains in the middle of harvest sometimes, which is something we never ever get. In our part of the world, we refer to June as January. We get quite a bit of rain, but September and October are far more of a sure thing. If you want to have an outdoor wedding, you will be far better planning it for September rather than in June. But that is starting to change too. And we just don't know. We really, I think we need more time. We need more time and see where these chips are going to fall. And are they going to settle? Are we going to find a certain routine, a certain predictability? Or is just going to be kind of wild, wild west, and every year is going to be different? And if that's the case, there are things again that we can do. It just means that it will be far more expensive than it already has been. And I know that people complain about the prices of Canadian wines, but that's just because, as I was saying, our land costs are more. Farming these lands with the current circumstances and situation is extremely pricey and expensive. The work that you had to do in one shot, now you have to spread it into, 3 or 4 segments. So just have to stay on our toes and do the best we can, and hopefully is like a bad weather system that you write it out. Maybe it's not. I'm still remaining hopeful and optimistic that it is going to find some sort of a rhythm and have some sort of an ebb and flow to it, not just this randomness that we are seeing, which is almost sometimes making it look very, very scary, to be honest with
Mm-hmm.
you.
Well, we've been in spring for a couple of weeks now, and as they say, hope springs eternal. So let's keep
Whole
our fingers
towns are
crossed.
burning up, like Lytton, like the whole towns are disappearing.
Yeah.
With the floods that we even, had earlier last year, uh, highway washed out, bridges gone, communities gone, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of livestock drowned.
Hmm.
Uh, British Columbia is really seeing the climate change. Um, talk to some friends in the old world, and they all think, what climate change? Yeah, some stuff are happening, but it's not enough. You guys are exaggerating, but they're not here. They're not seeing it. When I'm in Vancouver and I see a banana tree has a banana blossom and banana fruit on it,
That's not
Canada,
normal. That's not normal.
banana? What the hell's going on?
Right. Yeah.
So something's happening. We'll see.
Yeah. This is really important information, I think, for consumers and wine lovers to know, and really interesting that it's such the microclimate in BC is experiencing it so much more severely than other places. Uh, Thank you for taking the time to share with us. Is there anything you want consumers to know before we end this chat?
I just think that honestly, we can't wait for our governments to tell us what to do and what not to do. Is been long time coming, and I think we should all at least play it safer and start monitoring and managing our footprints.
Mm,
So try and live with less, try and live a more sustainable life, and try and give support to businesses that are taking that sustainability extremely seriously. And they are doing work not just to make a better wine, but to leave the environment that they're working in as good or as best of a shape as they possibly can for the next generation to come. We're not landowners, we are just stewards. We are renters, we are dwellers of that land for a period of time, and in the grand scheme of things it's just nothing. It's just like an instant, it's gone. So yet funny enough, we have tremendous amount of power in our hands to completely mess that up and leave it far worse for the next generation and for the next people who come and take over, or leave it in a better shape. So I think instead of, and it's very hard to say this because I understand, we don't have a lot of discretionary income, as Canadians as a whole, and with the systems of the governments and all that we have. But if you can, and if it's within your control, if it's within your power, try and support businesses that are very conscious of this fact and are trying to minimize their footprint, try and have sustainable practices. I think it will really be heartwarming for them, and set good, set good standards, and hopefully see more and more businesses follow suit. Um, I really do worry for, for the next generations
hmm
and for our region as a whole and our country. Again, I just hope that these are all been one-offs and it's almost like waking up from a bad dream. But every year that goes by, that optimism is unfortunately shrinking little by little, and sometimes by a lot. So we'll see. I don't know. We almost need to have this conversation again, maybe in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Uh, hopefully, hopefully it was just all a bad dream.
Let's definitely do that. I will check in with you every summer and just see how the situation is progressing there. And hopefully, it is not progressing too quickly and things manage to stabilize. I think it's really. I love what you say about being stewards of the land, and I know that the best winemakers consider themselves to be stewards of the land. So I appreciate your commitment to the
It's a way
environment
of
and to
life. It's not a
preservation.
business. It's not a business. It's a way of life, and
Right.
it's just so nice to be following the rhythm of the nature and going with the flow of the nature. But when it gets tremendously interrupted, creatures of habits that we get frazzled, and
Mhm.
we don't like it, and we now have to adapt, and that adaptation comes with tremendous cost. And we can try and absorb the cost as much as we can, but at some point it will have to be passed on to the consumer. And I feel for them, being a consumer myself naturally. I'm like, okay, these are already at the top price for what you can get from some other parts of the world. But I really want to support local. I really want to, give the money back to our own communities.
Hmm.
But it's just tough. But we just have to do it. Don't have a choice. Have to support the good guys doing the good fight and encourage them and cheer them on.
Well, we're delighted to have both Le Vieux and LaStella as part of our vegan directory of the Canadian vegan friendly wineries, and we love what you guys do. We are always proud to support our local wineries. We have some amazing wines here in Canada. So thank you for taking the time. I know you've got to get back to bottling, and we look forward to what you are releasing this year, and all the best for a great vintage.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Fingers crossed we have a good year ahead.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you.